latest top tips, reviews and advice, please subscribe below.
Hello and welcome to Attwoolls Outdoors with me, Mike. Today guys, a bit of a kind of tutorial slash sort of pitching video, kind of on how you're going to pitch a kind of a poled porch awning. Now, for this I'm going to use a bit more of a traditional kind of style, kind of porch awning as we know it, and the modelling in particular is actually the Quest Elite Kensington awning. It's about 2.5 meters deep, around about sort of 380 sort of in the width. So quite a very typical kind of standard porch awning that we'd come to see. And hopefully throughout this video we'll have some hints and tips and some ways to make your pitching process a lot easier, quicker and a bit more thorough. So first thing we'll do essentially is we'll kind of separate the kind of canvas and the actual frame. So traditionally you tend to find they come in sort of 2 separate bags, as we have here. Now it's a very good idea. What you can do is most porch awnings have got removable panels, so you can remove the sides and remove the front. What this actually will allow you to do is reduce kind of what we call the minimum weight. So the joys of the minimum weight is that when we come to feed it directly through the rail, we haven't got as much fabric to take through. And what you'll see also throughout this video as well, when we have just the bare roof, for example, it makes putting the frame a lot easier together, and it means you can access it from both sides rather than have to worry about things going on. And later on in the video what we will do is kind of zip the panels back in place and have a little play and make sure it's all nice and taut, and it's part of that of making it a bit more manageable as you go. For this I'm going to do this on my own. It makes life a lot easier. You've got a second pair of hands admittedly to do so. So what I'll do first before I start spreading the canvas out is get the frame out. Now I would highly recommend having a good sort through, and what I'm going to do now is actually kind of almost put the components into where they're going to go. If you have any more questions on this, what you can always do as well is actually have a look at your frame diagram. Most of them tend to be kind of numbered and trying to be around about the same sort of area to kind of give you a bit more of an idea. I've pitched this once before, so I kind of have a bearing of where things go, which does make life a lot easier. Often you find you'll have leg poles, sort of ridge poles we call it, or sort of veranda poles that go across, and then also the main pole that hooks into the unit at the top. So those are the main kind of ones you get. You also will find you'll also occasionally have poles that are almost down the back to sort of push the foam pad against it. Typically they tend to have a bracket kind of mounted on them, because actually it attaches directly there and then pegs and then push that foam pad a bit snugger to the vehicle itself. So once we've kind of spread out nearly everything, we're going to kind of go where we want it to go. It means when we will need it, it'll be kind of around about in the right location to make life a lot easier. That's there, that's there. And then some will also have a little kind of canopy pole, which looks like that. Normally there's sort of 2 plastic ends to it with holes in it, and that tends to go directly hook onto the hook itself. So now we're all somewhere. We've almost in a way checked our components are all here, and we'll be able to put the awning up as well as have it in around about the same or right locations. What we can now look on is the canvas. Traditionally I'd recommend having the ground sheet down if you open the canvas up. Just means that especially on hard sand you've got some protection. If you're dragging it around, you're not going to get kind of grass stains on the awning itself. For me, I'm pitching this thing and taking it straight back down for the sake of the video. So what I'm going to do is just kind of open up as we see here. So the beading, or the cader as it's also known, is located along the edge. With all pretty much porch awnings you tend to have what we call awning bracket pads. Now these are like a plastic pad that sits on the underside of the cader on a slightly smaller cader. Now the hooks that we saw earlier will hook directly into those, so it's at the point now I'd recommend by putting those on at a nice lower level, makes it a lot easier. If you've got 3 roof poles, typically it's be in the corners and 1 dead center. You can almost use a little note, things like any seam lines going down the middle tend to be the way, but we can tweak that a little bit once it's on the caravan. It's much easier to feed it on the ground level and play with it up top rather than have to try and feed it along the top and then alter it into the position as well. What you can see is certainly the ones in the corners will feed on like this. You can feed it directly on, often have a little button that presses down and often you can see there's a little kind of gap where the pole's going to come through, as we can see there. From here, what we can then do is look about feeding it directly through the rail. Again, a second pair of hands is never a bad idea, but if need be, you can quite happily do it its own. Especially if you've removed the panels, the side panels and the front panels, it makes this process a lot simpler and a lot easier. We've done a separate video on the actual Kensington itself and left the panels in place, so you can always see that as a kind of an alternative if you wanted to. I'd recommend, doesn't matter if you go through the front or the back. For me, I prefer the back just because of the way the caravan is. It's designed as one of a slightly older caravan, but I want to gather the material up almost underneath the rail, slide that directly through, and I almost watch it as we slide it through the rail, just to make sure it's not going to catch anywhere as we kind of pull it directly through. If need be, you can always take it back a little bit and kind of just realign it a little bit more. And then once it's on the rail, we'll kind of pull it into position. And it depends on where your door is located and where you want to put it. You want to leave yourself a good sort of gap. And the joys of actually removing the panels is that you can almost bring this aside and see where that foam pad is going to sit. So I've gone a little bit too far, so I can just bring that back a little bit more. With this, where my door is located, I want to make sure I've got just enough room. There we go. It will quite happily sit on the side of the door, and I can open and close that quite happily. So once we kind of position our caravan, the first port of call is we want to kind of almost start in the middle of the awning. So we'll basically get the middle out, back to the caravan, and sort of work out from there. So first thing I want to do is have a look at kind of the cross pieces, which are sort of in the front. You've got a little canopy pole built on, well, takes on. Personally, I myself like to put this in now, just because what you find is that actually when you want to come to use it, it's already in position. You haven't got to kind of scrabble around to put it in at a later date. Plus, it's by having it already in, if that level increases in terms of the height, it's still accessible and in the right location. So what we find is often there'll be essentially an eyelet in the actual fabric itself. So that's where the spike of the actual kind of the cross piece will go. But first, before we do that, we need to make sure we feed it directly through the gap, so the canopy pole sits out. I personally quite like to put the little rain cowls you get supplied with it on at this point. Again, it makes it a much more accessible height, and if anything, it's going to kind of try to hold that spike in place and stop it from maybe dropping down. Next thing we want to do is obviously get the ridge pole, sort of the main central roof pole, going directly back. So with this, we can kind of leave it with one hand, hold the place, put the actual clip in at there, and then open up the expansion veranda, feed it directly in, and then insert the button clip in until you see it come through the other side. Now I would recommend spreading a little bit to get a bit more tension in. That's going to stop that joint from falling out, and then we can work on the next vertical from here. So the next point of call is we'll put the leg pole directly in, and because we've positioned it as we see there, it makes life a lot easier. We can just drop it down in place. It means you haven't got to have a second pair of hands. From there, I'll just extend it up a little bit, just to kind of get it not too tight, but tall enough that you can quite happily stand up inside of it. At this point here, it's not a bad idea if you want to get some guide points just to give it a bit of tension. If it's a windy day, admittedly, just a bit of extra support is worthwhile. From here, we want to kind of walk outwards. So we've got actually the two little cross points now. You've got the kind of tension brackets. I always say it's better to have it further away from the center, just because it means when you extend that fully out, it's a bit more centralized. So again, we kind of, same idea, work from the center out, put that point directly in, clip it into place. There's no need to extend it out initially, but I'll do both sides when ready to go. And it sits in place like so. So at this point we want to designate whether we do the right side or left side first, and the same idea is that mainly the center. We'll put we'll call it the kind of cross piece in first, attach it on to the width, put the leg pole in, and then go back to the caravan. So we'll just kind of go through that process. Again, feed that straight through the canopy pole through initially, undo the clamp of the cross bit, bring that across, pop the bottom clip in place. I'd leave the actual, spread that out a little bit, not again too tight. Put the leg pole directly in place again. Extend that out a bit so it's a bit more of a better height. And then we'll go directly back again, so that'll kind of hold and sit in place. Extend that out. And tension from front to back. Not too much, but just enough. Again, crucial making that spike is all the way through. And because it's a slightly lower level, we can put the rain cowl directly on at this point here. So it's almost angling down a little bit, which is not too much of an issue. When we get the other side, we'll put some storm straps in if it was a windy day, just to kind of make sure it's at bay. But we'll do exactly the same process with the other side now. So again, feed that through the canopy section. Make sure the spike goes through the eyelet. Hold that in position. Bring that side pole towards the main kind of cross piece. Add a bit of tension. Not too much, just a little bit. Put that leg pole directly in. Just give it a little bit of support, not too much. And then put the hook in the top section. And bring that nice and firmly out to tension it away from the caravan. So like I said before, now it's a point, if it's a windy day, we can probably ratchet that down a little bit and just kind of keep it sort of a bit more stable. For me, what I'm going to do now is going to flip the initial kind of canopy section over itself, so it actually shows you the canopy pole and spike a lot clearly. Now most awnings will have, if they don't have essentially a bar going between, they'll just kind of rely on the eyelets going over that front section and pulling that taut to kind of keep it out. Most kind of good awnings, I would say, will have a bar in position, which often you'll find has to go through a sleeve. Now with this, I'd recommend kind of, again, keeping that kind of clip in the central part, so feeding that initially through the sleeve at the top, over the eyelet. Now at this point here, it's worth just to untension that front part, the front spike, just to kind of give it a little bit more play, and it can twist and turn a little bit. From here, we can undo the parts, feed it directly through the sleeve, and again making sure that canopy pole is undone. Bring that forward a touch, and just kind of feeding it onto there. Now you want to make sure you kind of push it back into a right angle, so it keeps it nice and taut. Now leave everything kind of just undone for the time being. Get it all kind of in position before making any kind of real adjustments. So once you've done one side, do the other. Nice and easily. So once we're in this position, what we can then do is quite happily put the eyelets on, pull it out to get that torsion, and also repeat all the way through. Once we've got kind of the torsion throughout the whole front of it, we can then kind of spread it away from where and get that canopy looking a bit sharper. Just trying to get a little bit crisper. And then the canopy is nicely in place. So now what we'll do is we'll zip the sort of side panels and front panels directly in. What we can then do is get that sort of firmly against the caravan before bringing it out and pegging it to make sure it's really nice and taut. So for me, I'd probably recommend putting kind of the side panels in first. Now the key with this really is to make sure, often if you've got panels that remove, you'll have kind of 4 zip pullers or runners, if you want to call them. Now I would always recommend doing it one sort of half on one side, half on the other. So you almost attach it at both ends of the zip. So again, feeding that through on the one side, what I want to do is kind of bring the material up towards it, and we can pull that in. It tends to be a little bit easier from the inside than from the outside. Because you haven't got that kind of excess kind of strain on the material, it makes life a little bit easier for the zip. It's not under tension in any way. So again, we'll feed that through. I'll say by doing it sort of this point upwards, okay, it's a little bit longer in terms of overall pitch length, in terms of time it takes to pitch. But one thing I think, you know, is quite apparent is that it's a much more manageable process. Being able to do it sort of every stage, and regardless of kind of your fitness to a certain degree, you know, it makes life a lot easier. And what's an extra 5 or 10 minutes pitching it? You know, that's not a huge amount of difference for something that's a bit easier to do. So again, we'll kind of bring the fabric up towards the zip to, again, that'll help kind of elongate the life of the zips and get less problems generally. Often you find it's most stressful points the corners. So by doing that kind of process with the zips as well, what you find is that you then have 2 zip pullers directly in the middle. So if you wanted to create like a little veranda kind of style, you've already got that ready to go. So now we've done the sides. Last thing we need to do is the front panel itself. Exactly the same kind of process we're looking at here. So it's going to go either zip on either side. So we are going to, in a sense, pretty much box ourselves in. So just make sure it brings it to. It depends on the actual zips you've got on it, whether they're like what I call a moulded tuff, which most of them tend to be when you've got removed panels, or alternatively a sort of spiral chain. Some are probably a little bit easier to handle than others. But either way, by doing it by kind of this kind of method, you've just got a bit more support behind it. And then we'll do this other front panel. Often what you find is actually you can bring the legs in a little bit, depending on how it is. If the span's kind of almost splayed out a little bit too more and you can't do the zip up, that's a good sort of telltale sign that we're a little bit further away. It's not the end of the world, like I said, because we haven't physically pegged it out yet, but we can kind of go from there. So there we go. So panels are all now zipped in. Next point of call is making sure we kind of get a nice and tight fit to the van itself. Now to do this, of course, we're going to use, most of them tend to have this kind of pole. So the actual part here will actually physically wind and clamp onto the frameworks on the inside, and then this will kind of create a real nice sort of hinge from the top, so we can really get that sort of foam pad nice and tight to the caravan. So we'll just go and insert those now. Often you find you've got to kind of undo the adjustment bit a little bit just to kind of get it in position. I know certainly some brands will have like an easy click system, just make it life a lot easier. Other thing I'd also recommend doing as well is if you haven't attached it to the actual awning itself, there'll be a little Velcro tabs which will allow you just kind of to keep that pole really nice and tight to the actual framework itself. Often other brands will have their own version. I know Isabella do have their real kind of lock system, and it actually really helps to lock the frame to the canvas and get that real sort of touch fit. Other brands, like, to be fair, this Crest one here has that ability, but what you find is that actually they don't, because it's a pasted technology, you know, you have to kind of buy the additional components from Isabella, but it's still got all the functionality just without the actual parts to it. It's there. So once we've done kind of both sides, we can then work on pegging it nice and tightly to the actual awning itself, which, if anything, is probably one of the more crucial parts. Once the poles are inserted, we want to try and get a nice tight fit to it. Ideally, we want it to be dead straight down the side, and what I'll do is do an initial kind of pegging point back here. So you want to probably take it underneath the vehicle about sort of maybe half a foot or so, with the kind of bring the pole sort of back towards you. The peg ideally wants to go in about a 45-degree angle, just because as it kind of tensions back, it's going to stop it from flipping up. What I would recommend doing is kind of doing 2 pegs sort of externally, so this side and the other side first, before we kind of move on to almost bringing it a little bit more internally. So we'll do the back side here first, again bringing it nice and tight to the awning itself. Often they'll, like I said, certain brands will have their kind of regulator tabs to make sure you get the right kind of height to it. But on this particular awning, it's not a feature. So now we've kind of done the back corners, what I would recommend doing is almost getting it dead square in terms of front. We're looking for a perfect kind of rectangular kind of shape. So really want it to be sort of nice and dead flush. What I'm going to kind of do at this point here, you'd almost get the regulator tabs in position, extend it up firstly because you've got a fixation point on the ground and you've got almost a spike to spike with kind of the Isabella models. With a standard model like this, I'm going to try and position it first, get that pegging point where I want to be, and then sort of adjust the frame internally. And one of these things you kind of a little play around with to see kind of what works in that sense. So we're just going to flip this around a little bit. Crucial thing is at this stage you want to make sure the zips are done up, just because what you can find is you can almost overstrain the actual zips itself. So ideally the leg wants to kind of follow the seam on that side. So we're just going to kind of initially just peg that like so. It's always handy to kind of have it on maybe a slightly further adjustable leg. So with the strap, you don't want to have it sort of already tightened too much. You're best off giving it a little bit more space, that way you can sort of tighten up as you need to. So again, with this particular awning, you'll make sure the one skirts are caught on the inside, and it helps you to kind of really visualize where that straight line needs to be. So not only you've got to get a straight line across here, but straight across the front as well. So we'll initially just kind of peg it down a little bit. Again, like I said, allowing we've got some straps. So at this point here, now we've kind of got the main sort of square done, I'm going to go inside and extend it up. Ideally, you don't want it to be kind of too high off the ground. Admit you've got mud skirts, but the joys with kind of necessarily a kind of a poled awning is you've got a lot more play into it, so you can obviously adjust the poles and tweak it as we see fit. The same with the roof section, we can kind of just tweak that a little bit and get that looking a bit more tight, a bit tighter. So for me, we're just going to nip in that front door, zip the front door behind me, and then have that sort of little tension internally. I would always probably start with the middle pole just to kind of get that sort of roundabout height, and then most things will kind of sit on a similar kind of level. You'll kind of feel it a bit as well as with the overall tension, how things will kind of go up and down. And if you feel you need to adjust the roof fabric at all, it's a good time to kind of just do that and get a bit more tension through that roof. Just getting looking a little bit sharper at every stage. You can see we're not kind of over pegged it too much. We can still get in and out of doors, zip that down and down. But from a floor level, it's sitting a bit sharper. And the true thing is obviously if you can obviously peg that down and still get tension into that, then that's obviously quite crucial as well. It's worth having a little look around the awning, make sure you're not kind of got too much any kind of baggy areas or a bit of saggage. Just do that a little bit more. And again, you might find it needs a little bit of tweak here and there. So from here, I'm just going to bring that sort of pole slipped out a little bit. And again, we just go inside and just tension that up a little bit more. So. tighter, and then from here we can more than happily just kind of peg that a bit sharper. With the corner points, it's probably best to kind of cross over, just give a decent amount of tension either side. I'd recommend doing kind of opposite ends to one another. So we've kind of pulled it from that side, we'll do the same from here, and to get a bit more on that location there. You want to kind of keep these as dead straight as possible. The joys of kind of the elasticated part is that you can give a little bit more give to it. You want to just get that a bit more extra tension when you need it. And from here we kind of work our way around. Again, depends on the clips you've got and the elasticated parts you've got. For me, I prefer the ones that are kind of a bit fixed and can't be removed, just because I find it's a little bit easier to kind of get it sitting a bit smarter. Admittedly, with harder standing, it can be a bit trickier. So again, we've done the edge here. We'll kind of tension that back across from this side. Just get it sitting. Normally you can see this if there's any kind of crease in the fabric, so you've come out a little bit too much. But that kind of crossing thing is really going to help when you want to undo the zips a bit later on. So now we've done either side, we'll just directly do the middle. Life makes it a bit easier when you're on grass, I will say that, in comparison to hard standing, which can be an absolute pain in derriere. And last but not least, this side. So next thing, we've kind of got the main parts all pegged out really nicely, is to kind of get that belts and braces to secure it down. So what most awnings, I would recommend highly for most awnings to be fair, is kind of a sort of storm strap system. So this tends to be kind of like a nice overdue heavy webbing strap. Hopefully they kind of clip onto the actual awning itself like we do with this one. In fact, for the Kensington it comes supplied with it as standard, but not all brands necessarily do that. The reason it's quite nice to buy necessarily the brand's version is because often you find it clips into it, it's going to be a little bit more stronger and get general less kind of wear and tear with it as such. The reason I say this is because I'm not a massively fan of kind of the conventional ones that go a big long strap that goes directly over the top of it. The reason being is that because you almost have a bit of fabric kind of shifting and moving on the other with kind of the wind. So you find it might degrade the fabric or rub on the fabric a little bit. So that's a consideration to make sure. The ones with the springs personally are probably the better ones, just because they've got a little bit more give to it. So we've got a really nice big webbing strap that kind of clips in place. I personally like to kind of peg where you want to peg it first and then adjust it onto afterwards. Now you want to kind of make sure it's sort of dead straight and almost anchoring the awning necessarily down. So with the peg itself, put it in about a 45-degree angle. These kind of V-shaped pegs are the better ones because, especially in softer ground, it kind of grips a lot more we'll just pop the spring on, pop the clip onto it, and then kind of pull that back towards it in many ways, and get a good amount of tension to it. And often there'll be a little kind of retainer clip, just to keep it all nice and tight. Like I said, when you've got that, it's pretty rock solid once it's physically on there, but again, it almost pulls the fabric directly down. Or if you go better still, by having it almost looped around the framework and pulling that down, like with the Isabellas, they don't do that. Again, that also keeps it a bit more kind of stability. You can almost buy an additional one if you want to loop it down this point and anchor it down from the front. Fair enough, you've all got additional storm ties here on most awnings, just again when it's a bit kind of worse for weather, you can also just implement them as you need to. But yeah, that really is kind of how you're going to pitch your kind of traditional kind of awning. The only thing we've yet to do is put the curtains in, which is a simple process, and then obviously a draft skirt. But that in all is kind of how you'd go about it. By all means, let us know if this video's been helpful by sort of liking the video. You're always welcome to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We've got lots of different videos on all sorts of things kind of camping and outdoors related. But yeah, hopefully you found this helpful. For more information, you can check the link below this video. It will show you the product we've used for the particular video as well as the other things we have located on the website. But we'd love to hear from you guys on what you would like to see us do in terms of videos, tutorial videos, or anything else kind of outdoors related. But yeah, that's kind of our little video review / tutorial. Thank you so much again for watching, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.